All right. Very often people ask me, what does a Department of Planning and Urban Form do? What is it about? And if I don't have much time, as I really don't today, I say, well, it's simply about cities and nature. If I take a little more time, I'd say that means cities in nature, and it's Chattanooga, or nature in cities, and that's also Chattanooga. But it's also about scale, and it goes from the smallest scale, the flower pot on a windowsill, or some of the green infrastructure we just saw, all the way to what we call the mega region, and here is Cascadia, the mega region in which we sit. But to quote Gloria Steinem, or paraphrase her, and I understand it's actually an Australian senator named Irina Dunn who first came up with the original saying, does nature need cities like a fish needs a bicycle? And I'm going to, I think, answer in the affirmative, or at least make you think about that. So here's an image of the US looking out to mid-century and showing substantial growth in some parts of the country in the red, but also abandonment in others. And so we know by mid-century we'll be looking at 100 million more urban dwellers in the United States. So that's not just new population, but people who are living in cities. And we've thought about this in terms of these large connected systems of metropolitan areas that we call megaregions. And we have a choice here. These megaregions could develop, as in the Northeast, as the trend suggests, and you see that in the inset image, and occupy a multiple of the land area that they currently do. Or we could accommodate the same population in a much smaller footprint with serious consequences. To make this work, obviously, we need to invest in infrastructure in order to have efficient cities that are properly connected, something that is certainly feasible. We've also looked on the nature side in terms of large units of landscape scale conservation, and are happy to say that in the US, and even creeping across the border as you see here, our government has recognized these large natural systems, which are, by the way, seamless and include urban areas as well, as the right scale at which to think about the way nature works and its lack of respect for the jurisdictional boundaries that usually inhibit us. So in addition to global urbanization, which we've heard about from Patrick, another driving force that concerns us in my department is climate change. It was called by Nicholas Stern the greatest externality the world has ever seen. We had already been at work for a couple of years at this point at the Lincoln Institute on planning for climate change. Then more recently, now Lord Stern said, I got it wrong on climate change. I was really scared when I saw that headline after all the work. But in fact, as we all know, especially with the fifth assessment that came out last weekend, it's far, far worse than he thought. And indeed, the consequences that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the UN has pointed to are likely to shift to the right side, where catastrophe is a more likely result. And of course, this is going to be felt unevenly in different parts of the world. And again, the fifth assessment points out that the dry places are going to be drier, the wet places wetter, and this is quite inconvenient. In terms of nature, we have to see that the impacts across the US and North America as a whole, I'll go back one, will vary, but we do have large places where habitat is going to be affected, endangered species will become extinct, and we need to think big in order to provide room for critters and plants to adapt and move across changing habitats. Another characteristic of this has to do with uncertainty. We look at a range of projections out to the end of the century, and based on our behavior and based on what we know and don't know about the operation of the atmosphere, we could have some far different results in terms of the actual environmental impact. This has led us to invest in developing tools that help us incorporate uncertainty in our planning and accept that we cannot predict with accuracy the future. We have a policy focus report you can find on the web, which shows some examples. So here we are from a U.S. perspective, a partly doubting country when it comes to the phenomenon of climate change. A relatively recent drought monitor report showing a tremendous drought in California. A long-term look at wildfires across the United States, which are becoming more intense. Tornadoes may or may not be climate influenced, but certainly widespread impact there. And then over the long run, hurricane tracks, which affect much of the United States. So with all this, what is the role of cities in terms of contributing to global warming? Is it as high as 75 or 80%, as some have said? That's certainly consistent with the Clinton Climate Initiative's original statement about the disproportionate blame to be placed on cities. And here we have U.S. government indication of total carbon emissions, and you see the metropolitan areas of the U.S. lit up in red. So yes, cities do emit greenhouse gases. Or is it possibly more like 40%, half as much? And this is a figure you get when you think about per capita carbon emissions. And with the same base, looking at the U.S., what you see is a very different pattern. Here, the largest cities do not show up as high per capita greenhouse gas emitters, but it's really the more sprawling and automobile-oriented parts of the country that show up that way. We have certainly looked at this, and this is as a souvenir from Patrick Condon, who, with colleagues here at UBC, did a report for us on urban planning tools, in which you will see that even modestly more compact development produces real benefits in terms of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And so transformations like those in Surrey are obviously part of the solution of global warming. I fortunately have 2 minutes to say a few more things. We have gone, in the US at least, from showing concern to very often an undue skepticism about climate change and its effect on all of us. This is unfortunate. As we've looked around at the already felt impacts of climate change in the US, and in this case also looking across at Australia, we see the urgency of action and the particular role of cities as part of the solution and not essentially the problem. But in terms of this other driving force of global urbanization, the news here is that if we say there are going to be 2.5 billion more urban dwellers by mid-century, that's essentially UN projection, perhaps 1 billion of that accounted for in just 4 countries, India, China, Nigeria, and the United States. What is the significance of that amount, that sheer quantity of new urban population? Well, it could be not so bad if you think of cities as a place where emissions per capita are lower and a place where we can be much more efficient. But unfortunately, the trend in some ways has been otherwise. And the work of Solly Angel for the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy suggests that for a very large sample of cities over a very long period of time, we have been seeing reduced densities to the point that the footprint that would be occupied by all of these new urban dwellers could be twice as much as the historical urban footprint. So a tremendous use of land resources, a tremendous potential impact on the planet